أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم جنات النعيم خالدين فيها وعد الله حقا وهو العزيز الحكيم. خلق السماوات بغير عمد ترونها وألقى في الأرض رواسي أن تميد بكم وبث فيها من كل دابة وأنزلنا من السماء ماء فأنبتنا فيها من كل زوج كريم. هذا خلق الله فأروني ماذا خلق الذين من دونه بل الظالمون في ضلال مبين. ولقد آتينا لقمان الحكمة أن اشكر لله ومن يشكر فإنما يشكر لنفسه ومن كفر فإن الله غني حميد. صدق الله العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وقدوتنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم. This is coming through okay?
It might be better without it.
Huh?
It might be better without it.
Without it?
Yeah.
Okay. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا. Oh, okay. ما شاء الله. وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you very much everybody for coming today. It's my first time in the UK. Pleasant experience so far, though I've only been here for a few hours. Quite lovely. I was hoping for rain. Haven't gotten rain yet, but inshallah there's a couple weeks to go. I was told to talk about Surah Luqman, specifically the wisdom of Luqman himself. And this is a very, very important thing. I'm going to get into this very, very well-known sort of page of the Quran where Luqman alayhi salam gives specific advice, and what is the actual advice is very clear, and many people talk about it. There's many videos on YouTube, people more eloquent than I am, that you can probably refer to. But one thing that really interests me when I approach reading the Quran that I'd like to share with you is how the stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to tell align with the greater message of that particular surah. Right? Because the story of Luqman, okay, we call it Surah Luqman, there's something before that story in the surah. There's something after that story in the surah. And it's not merely incidental that Allah Azza wa Jal chose to tell that story at that particular time in that particular place. That there's a larger message that Allah Azza wa Jal is trying to get us to think about. The story of Luqman and giving advice to his son is archetypal, right? Or is sort of emblematic of those lessons and those points. So if you want to really distill down to one idea, which is a challenge, but it's a good challenge to do with you when it comes to training yourself for how to read the Quran. Because it's a benefit to be able to walk away and say, Surah Luqman, what's it about? What's the main idea? Surah Al-Baqarah, what's the main idea? Right? Surah Al-Naml, what's the main idea behind it? What's the main point to both Surah Luqman and the story of Luqman talking to his son, which is an illustration of that main point? And it all comes down to the nature of what is the hikmah, the type of hikmah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He gave Luqman. It's right in the top of the page, the first ayah, and it's led into by the ayat that were recited by our dear brother, that the main point, it has to do with shukr. It has to do with gratitude. If you look at how Allah leads up to the story of Luqman on the first page of the surah before, He's talking about what was mentioned, the different ayat, the different parts of the creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed for you to think about. They're not incidental. They're not accidental. They're not random. They're not the process of just random genetic mutations. They're not the process of just random rocks colliding and forming according to random rules, clusters of gas and stardust, and etc., etc. Everything has purpose behind it. So then what is the purpose behind it? The purpose is to get you to consider that all of this here, whether it's the heavens and the earth and the mountains and these sorts of things and these sorts of things, is meant to get you to be grateful. That it's tied to your ability to be grateful. This seems really counterintuitive when we think about faith. There's reasons for that too. Living in 2024, well downstream of Enlightenment philosophy, when we think of faith, when we think of belief, what comes to mind is a list of things that we think are true. Okay, well, I believe in a creator, and I believe in the afterlife, and I believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's not wrong, but that's not the only way to understand faith and belief. And historically speaking, it's not the way that that word was traditionally used. That faith used to refer to a virtue of the heart. Okay, faith was something that was a virtue of the heart that the heart practiced. And that's why you say someone is faithless, right? As almost like an insult. This person demonstrates that they lack this virtue, right? What's the difference between these two sorts of paradigms? It shifts things from being just cognitive, well, I think that this is true and you think that this is true, and someone over here believes in the flying spaghetti monster, and this person over here believes in, that Elon Musk is an alien or something, right? Which are all sort of put on a level playing field, versus something that clearly has a moral dimension to it, that it's right or it's wrong. To have faith is what is right. It's a virtue. And to be without faith is a vice. It's something that is sinful. It's something that is a dereliction of duty. It's criminal neglect. It's something that has put you in a position to fundamentally invert and destroy the whole purpose for which you have been created and for which you exist. So this older idea, bismillah, okay? Oh, now we're really cooking. So faith as a virtue is a much older idea, just like the word religion. The word religion, if you go back to its origin, does not just mean some sort of genus of which there are different species, and Islam is a species, and Christianity is a species, and Buddhism is a species. This is a very new way of looking at things. Religion originally had to do with duty. It originally meant the duty that you had to your Creator. So again, it has a very strong moral element. So when we talk about faith, when we talk about religion, when we talk about shukr, in Islam, these three things are like a constellation. You cannot separate these three things. You have faith, iman, you have gratitude, shukr, and you have religion, what we call deen. What's the relationship between the three parts? What is your duty to your Creator? It is shukr. It is gratitude. That is the main point of the surah, and much of the Quran. That the duty that you have as a human being, here you are. It's like that one Bollywood movie with Amir Khan. He wakes up and he forgets everything every day. He wakes up and he likes to look in the mirror and read all of his notes, right? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, right? That's you. You came into the creation. Here you have fingers, a fingerprint. You have cells. You have a unique DNA. You have unique experiences. You have Allah chose you to be in Bristol. It's quite lovely, by the way, mashallah. He chose you to be here in this day with me. And the first time I came to the UK. Is it random? Does it have a purpose? And what does Allah want from you? Because of it, He wants you to be grateful. He wants shukr. Now, the rest of the deen is about explaining, well, how do you express that gratitude? And we'll get there. That's actually part of the anatomy of the story of Luqman and the advice that he gives to his son. You see that he follows the same pattern Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala follows in the Quran, where the first thing that he does is he brings you to a point of shukr. What's the internal response that you are supposed to have? The person with a faithful heart, the person with a virtuous heart, what are they supposed to feel? They're supposed to feel shukr. They're supposed to feel gratitude. That's the first thing. Okay, what if you don't feel gratitude? Then what are we going to do with you? Just, burn you at the stake and send you off to hellfire? No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lists all of His ni'am. He lists all of His blessings. He lists the fact, okay, maybe you take yourself for granted because you're with yourself 24/7. All right, look at the trees. Look at the mountains. Look at the oceans. Look at the rivers. Look at all these different things. Okay? And then he says toward the end, one of the ayat that was recited, show me who else has created anything. Aren't you going to be grateful? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does a little bit of foreshadowing in that first page when he refers to the people who don't have gratitude as dhalimin. We know that one of the first things that Luqman says to his son, and we'll talk about it in depth, is that shirk is dhulm. That not having the proper gratitude is an oppressive thing. We'll talk about that. Doesn't make sense to our modern sort of identity politic mind, but it's actually quite profound. He foreshadows that by saying towards the end of the page that if you're not doing this work, okay, بَلِ الظَّالِمُونَ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. He says the people who are oppressors are far astray when talking about even thinking for a moment that you're going to give gratitude to anything else other than Allah for everything that you see. So we have gratitude. Surah Luqman is about gratitude. And the advice leading into it that Luqman is going to give to his son is exactly about gratitude. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begin to say? He says that we gave Luqman al-hikmah. We gave him the wisdom. Alif Lam yastaghfir al-jins. It's a very interesting thing. He could have said, always think, what could Allah have said? He could have said he gave Luqman hikmah. He gave Luqman al-hikmah. What's the hikmah? What's the wisdom? What's the very next thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says? Iman, for you usulis. He says that you be grateful. Anishkur lillah. That is the wisdom. That Luqman, or the nature, or the flavor, the essence of the wisdom that Luqman was granted was that you must be grateful to all these things that you find. That is the asl, that's your basis, your foundation for everything else that comes out. All the fiqh books, the tahara, and salah, and zakah, and hajj, and fasting, and this, and that, it's all expressing your gratitude. Those things without gratitude are worth very, very little. So he says that's the first thing, is he equates wisdom, al-hikmah, with gratitude. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something very interesting. He says, وَمَن يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ. Just so we don't get it twisted. Because if the shaitan cannot trick you to not be grateful at all, then his next sort of step in the flowchart is to divert your gratitude in some sort of perverse way, to pervert your gratitude. Now, his ultimate objective would be to send that gratitude somewhere else, towards some sort of statue, or some sort of zodiac sign, or some sort of horoscope, or whatever it is. Crystals. What do we believe in? What's it called? Manifesting, right? Manifest my, just bring it into being. Just manifest it, right? That would be great success for shaitan. But even if he can't do that, then what else is he going to do to you to pervert your gratitude? He will pervert your gratitude by getting you to think that Allah is benefiting from it and not you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to be crystal clear. You're being grateful. And this is something we hear Christians and people who have left Christianity say a lot. Why does God need us to worship Him? Right? We feel like God is some sort of jealous God. It's so petty. Why would He have us praying to Him 5 times a day? How desperate, right? Astaghfirullah. But you see the shubha, you see the doubt that they're operating upon. They're imagining what it would be like for a person to ask you. I mean, if I ask you, can you please call me 5 times a day? What would that look like? I look really desperate, right? That's too much. I hate talking on the phone, by the way, so please don't ever call me 5 times a day. Awesome, okay? Right? Yes, if it was from a human being, that would look desperate and that would be very cringe. But coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not because He needs it. So He doesn't want you to get it twisted. He doesn't want your gratitude to be perverted. It's actually for your own benefit. What's the purpose of this gratitude? Is Allah so self-absorbed, waliyadu billah, that He needs you, He has to, for His own ego or something, you reach out to Him 5 times a day? Absolutely not. You need that. If you want your heart to stay pure, then you need that. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Shams, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. That this is only a two-way street. It's a moving train one way or the other. There's no third option. Either your soul is getting pure and pure, your heart is getting pure and pure and pure, or it's getting rustier. Guys, it's like your muscles, okay? You're playing out football, and I think we got a football match scheduled for later in the week. I don't know if that's where that's at, but yes, I do play football. Your football, don't worry. Yeah. I mean, I also play the other football, but I play your football as well. I'm trying to be hermeneutic here. I know some of the lingo. There's the flat and lift and, peri chicken. So, where were we? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want you to get it twisted. Your gratitude is only for your own benefit. It's not for His benefit. He doesn't need it at all. It doesn't hurt Him at all. Okay, so Allah's words are very clear and they're very interesting. The way that He phrases it, وَمَن يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمَن كَفَرَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. Allah doesn't need it. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of people, we were talking about economics earlier today. Any economic major in here? Economics? MashaAllah, mashallah. Economics really thinks highly of itself, right? I was political theory first, and economics guys were politics, poli-sci, you guys, and then philosophy. It's whoa, you guys are just who knows? So, what's a definition? You talk about self-interest a lot in economics, and there's one of the most unspoken assumptions in microeconomic theory, at least, is that everybody acts on their own self-interest. What's not talked about is what self are we talking about? Which self? What are the boundaries of that self? What's the constitution of that self? What is the content of that self? And that's where economic theory and every other human sort of ideology falls flat, is that its conception of the self is very, very small and very, very limited. It thinks that your self is only from the time that you're a baby to the time that you go to your grave. It completely ignores your soul, completely ignores your afterlife, completely ignores the purification of your heart. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to us and tells us not to pervert our gratitude by making sure that we realize that it's only for our self-interest. He's also teaching us what our true self-interest is. And our true self-interest incorporates and accounts for the interest of our soul. In fact, the interest of our soul and the interest of our heart is the most essential thing to ourselves. Way more essential than the calories that we need, or the amount of hours of sleep that we need, or any other sort of physical need that we have. The most essential thing to us is our soul. So He's teaching us who is you, who is yourself, and what is your true self-interest. Your true self-interest, the most self-interested thing that you could do, is to be grateful to Allah. If you're not grateful to Allah, you are criminally guilty of neglecting your soul, and there's a very real risk that it can become rustier and rustier and rustier, atrophy, right? It's like if you guys, you used to play football back in the day, but you've been sitting on your butt since COVID, and now you can't make, your cross can't reach the box, okay? Or whatever, It's like now you've atrophied, you've lost it. You've lost the ability to do that, okay? Allah doesn't want you to lose that ability. Make sure you hold on to it. So He teaches us that wisdom is about gratitude. The whole point that we're here is for being grateful. And He teaches us that this gratitude is only in our own self-interest. Allah doesn't benefit from it whatsoever. The next ayah, we get into the advice. Okay, so Luqman is now advising his son. This is very interesting. We see that advice, yes, it's a good thing. It's part of our religion that you can advise other people. And there's two extremes. There's people on one side that say, none of your business, get out of my face, right? What's it to you? Buzz off. And there's other people who advise you about every little thing, and they act like you're going to the hellfire. I had one guy in Medina, when I was sitting out in front of my wahda, my dormitory, and I was clipping my nails. It was Friday. And he said, Astaghfirullah, you're clipping your nails outside, it's haram. I was like, really? Well, where'd you come across this? She's like, I don't know, but I read it in a book somewhere. Oh, okay, which book? You're like, I don't know, but it was a good book. It's like, so we find that there's two extremes. Okay, there's some people that say, "Akhi, anasiha, anasiha, anasiha," and actually it's just flexing their own ego. We know people like that. So Yes, we do. But then there's the other extreme, which is Western society, which says, don't get into my personal space, don't tell me what to do. You absolutely do not talk about my religion or my or the things that I believe or hold me accountable for anything like that. So Islam teaches us that there's some middle ground there. Okay, Luqman gives advice to his son. Okay, he says this is in your self-interest. There are some things that you have to know, very, very important things. Please hold on to them. And one of the main things that he talks about is that, and he starts with Allah, because the rights of Allah come first. Leave the fiqh discussion about that for a second. The priority is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the first most important messages that Luqman delivers to his son is that shirk is great oppression. Shirk is dhulm alim. This completely upends what we think of as oppression when we hear the word in the English language. Because the word oppression, we're used to hearing it in the sense of identity politics or social justice theory or these sorts of things. We think oppression, and what we really have been taught to come to mind is the oppression of the body. Right? Killing, theft, all these sorts of things. Yes, oppression, 100%. But it's a limited definition of what is the self. There are other types of oppression that extend beyond the body and what you can do to the body. Okay? And the worst possible oppression that there could be, Allah tells us, is to have something else, to give it that gratitude that's only due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why is it so bad? First of all, it contradicts the very purpose for which you exist. We said that the purpose for which you exist is to experience Allah's signs and to be grateful for them, to be moved to express that gratitude in the ways that He will tell you shortly. And that's only for your benefit, so that you can get into Jannah and Allah proves His glory by the fact that we actually go through this process of sort of reckoning and belief. And the second thing is that without this type of proper worship and proper putting gratitude and worship in its proper place, we undermine our ability to do justice in every other realm. There is no possibility to do true racial justice or true gender justice or true economic justice without having the component that addresses Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His definition of justice first. If we skip over step one, we fall flat on our face, either going to this extreme or that extreme. The very, very first thing and the foundational thing is to take care of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worship, aka gratitude to Him. Next we have when we get to so that's pretty much verse number 13. We get down to the next verse, verse number 14. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us another thing to do that's right next to gratitude to Allah, is gratitude towards parents. And you've probably heard a million YouTube videos about this, so I'm not going to dwell on it. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts gratitude towards a parent next to gratitude to Himself, because both of them have a similarity. What's the similarity? Let's make it interactive. What's the similarity?
They take care of you.
Okay, Allah takes care of you, parents take care of you. I take care of you, Habib.
They earn it.
Something a little more specific.
I don't know.
Say again?
Parents
Kind of made you, okay, yeah. We're getting warmer.
Can't repay back.
Huh?
Can't repay back.
Can never pay it back, yes. They're like gods? Guardians. Sorry, forgive me, I'm American. I'm still working on that accent. All very good, yes. Anyone else? I mean, that's all right. Yes, there's dependence, yes.
It's easy to forget what they did for you because you don't have memory of what they did for you, like what they did, so then you can have comfort of that.
Very good. That's what I was going to. Yes?
You were vulnerable at one point with your parent and
Yes. Put those two together, mashallah. You have a huge debt to pay that you didn't choose. You didn't choose. You come into this world, Allah gave you your skin tone, your hair texture, your complexion, the shape of your nose, shape of your lips, shape of your body, determine your risk for you, all this other stuff. You had no choice. Sorry. You're stuck with it. Don't worry, guys. You can hit the gym. Work on yourself a bit. Your parents, they fed you. They changed your nappies. Right? They took care of your wounds. When you cried, they picked you up. You can't even remember all the stuff that they did for you. You were too young. Your memories are gone. And so you come into the world with an enormous mountain of debt that you can never repay. To Allah and to your parents. So there's a transferable skill there. There's a transferable skill. Okay, and the skill is gratitude. Okay? You have no choice but to be grateful. And there's grace in that. It's not transactional. You can't ever do anything, and we know you all are probably well aware, there's a situation after the death of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, I believe, they were making tawaf in Mecca. Of course, where else would they make tawaf? The point was, don't answer that. I believe it was Abdullah ibn Umar, if not his father, Umar ibn Khattab. And he saw somebody making tawaf carrying his mother on his back. Because his mother was old and frail. And he said to, now that I'm remembering the story, I believe it was Umar ibn Khattab. And he said to Umar, he said, do you think I've paid her back for anything? And he says, Wallahi, you've not even paid her back for even a single breath that she took when she was delivering you. The nature of our relationship with our parents is the closest thing that we can experience to our relationship with Allah, in the sense that there's an enormous, enormous debt that we didn't choose, that we'll never repay. But our duty, the action point, is to spend the rest of our lives being grateful for it. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us limits, because although our gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no limits, our gratitude to our parents does have some limits. Right? They're not the same. Even though they have a similitude, or a point of similitude, they're not exactly the same. So what is the difference? In verse 15, he talks about some of these limits. What would happen if your parents, to whom you're indebted, to whom you owe gratitude, they command you to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, through Luqman, advising his son, that is a limit. And here, it's a very interesting language that Allah uses. He differentiates between ittiba' and musahaba. Right? He says that you don't have to, or I should say ta'ah and musahaba. It says you do not have to obey them in evil. That is the limit. If they order you to do something that is haram, that is against Allah's sharia, or they order you to do something, command you to do something that is violating His tawheed, or is violating your gratitude towards Him, that's the limit. But you still have musahaba. You still accompany them with excellent accompaniment, and you give them their rights. So there's a difference between that sort of obedience and accompanying. That is important. Then we see some of, when Luqman continues and he gives advice to his son, what does gratitude look like? Because great, now everybody should be like, all right, yeah, ready to be grateful. And this is how Allah always moves us as the listener in the Quran. The first step is to always get us to feel that gratitude in our hearts. To get us to the point where we're like, okay, I'm ready to act, now what? What do I do? So now he's going to tell you exactly what it looks like to be grateful. He says, first he begins with the salah. Ya bunay, aqim as-salah, wa'mur bil ma'ruf, wanha 'anil munkar, wasbir 'ala ma asabak. So we have here, these things come together very intentionally, and they represent different levels, and they also represent da'wah, and what you have to be prepared for in da'wah. The first is your salah. Your salah is your communication with your Lord, and the proof that you are trying to maintain a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we talked about phone calls and calling you too much, there's also calling someone too little. Would it make sense if you said, yeah, this guy, man, he's my bro, he's my best friend, man. Yeah, fam, he's my best friend. Oh, that's great. How often do you talk to him? Oh, it's been 5 years. Yeah, you're lying. You're not best friends. If you haven't talked to him in 5 years, there's a minimum amount of upkeep that any relationship takes. Which is why in the Sharia there's a time limit for if two spouses, there's abandonment, right? If two spouses have been apart for a certain amount of time, this is a legitimate cause for khula, that women can pursue a divorce, or even in extreme cases, if the husband is lost at war or something like that. It's in the books of fiqh that nasq or fasq or whatever, we don't open that can of worms, But the marriage contract can be annulled because there's no relationship. Because the relationship is nowhere to be found. So what about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If you're a Christian, you say, oh, I pray when I feel like it. MashaAllah, how often is that? Every Christmas, right? Christmas and Easter, maybe, right? Feast of St. Stephen. Like, how often do you pray really? Now, okay, there are some Christians that pray quite fervently, but the point is that if it's left up to you and your feels and your vibes, you're not going to pray very much. What's going to happen? Allah tells you in the Quran what's going to happen. You're only going to pray when your back's up against the wall, when the plane starts to go down. Oh God, help me. Even the atheist believes in God then, right? But that's not enough for a real relationship, okay? That's like the friend that calls you when he's out of money and he needs a loan, right? Like, hey, how you been? Yeah, I know I haven't talked in a while. Hey, I'm short for the month. Can you give me No, that's not a real relationship. A real relationship is that I'm going to check in on you. I'm going to visit you. How you doing? What's going on? You okay? You need anything? We're going to go out. We're going to do something together. Okay? Your salah is like that with Allah. You're telling Him, I'm turning my problems over to you. I'm depending upon you. What do you need me to do? I'm here. I need you. I love you. I'm grateful for you. 5 times a day, bare minimum. Allah told us, the bare minimum, to have the appropriate relationship where that heart, which way is it going? Is it getting rustier, rustier, rustier? Or is it getting stronger and stronger and stronger? The difference of that seesaw, 5 times, is the middle. If you're 5 and above, it's getting stronger. If you're less than 5, it's getting weaker. That's the first one. The second one, then he says, وَأْمُرْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, and command that which is evil. This is the most anti-secular concept that we have in the Quran. That Islam is meant to transform society. Islam is meant to contribute to society. Do not become a secular Muslim, where your prayers, or I should say your deen, is limited to the 4 walls of a masjid and your prayer book and the 5 pillars. All the rest of the stuff you probably learned in weekend school. That's not only what Islam is. Islam is supposed to transform society. Do you believe that the law of Churchill or the law of Parliament or common law is superior to Allah's law? Of course you do. Okay, so we have to do our best to try to contribute to society, to transform it, to educate it, to make it see the justice of Allah's divine wisdom, and to look for the opportunities that we have to bring that to bear in this life as much as possible. Now, it's interesting, and this is something that it's a contention with translation. Okay, what bil ma'ruf? How is it usually translated? Commanding the good, right? Who wants to tell me the difference between ma'ruf and good? Ma'ruf is not a literal translation, or good is not a literal translation of ma'ruf. Ma'ruf comes from something that's known, right? Which is very, very important if you're going to translate this concept, because it shapes the contours of your action, okay? If you have someone who goes flying in at you, he says, who's got a fade in here? Who's got a fade haircut? MashaAllah, you guys are too pious. Oh my God, brother, that's qaza. The Prophet ﷺ said, do not shave part and leave part. Right? Astaghfirullah. Right? Is this, and is that he'd go home feeling good and patting himself on the back? Oh, I commanded the good. Commanded the good today, Mom. Alhamdulillah. Wa faith. Akhi, that's not al-amr bil ma'ruf. Sorry, that's not. Okay? What is known good? First of all, you butchered the application of the hadith, because that's not what the hadith is. Halq, first of all. Second of all, it's random, like patches to make you look weird, to turn the ayn away from you. That's a separate discussion. But the idea is, Allah calls it al-ma'ruf for a reason. It's not al-khayr. If Allah wanted to say, wa'mur bil-khayr, He could have said, wa'mur bil-khayr. He didn't say, wa'mur bil-khayr, wa'mur bil-ma'ruf. And ma'ruf will always have an element of urf. And ma'ruf will always have an element of the things that are known to everybody. Akhi, don't talk like that to your mom. Akhi, what you did was wrong. Sister, you shouldn't say that. These things that everybody knows. Come on, let's pray. These things that everybody knows. Which makes a lot of problems. If you can understand that concept, you can eliminate a lot of problems. That's amazing. key. MashaAllah. Well, I'm glad you're following along, and so is your computer. Then, okay, so this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you an order and a plan for da'wah. Okay, first of all, you can't do da'wah without your salat and without your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't think that you're going to go, and this is where we need to merge if we're talking about Palestinian activism. Okay? Make sure that those protests have salat and time for salat. And everybody who's doing activist work for Palestine, alhamdulillah, may Allah reward you, but you're going to get slaughtered. Maybe not bodily, but spiritually, if you're not firm with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you know how easy it is? And every government from the United States is a big criminal with this, but I'm sure the UK is just as bad, as they always are. When it comes to co-opting movements, corrupting movements, infiltrating movements, doing all this stuff, if you're not straight and strong on your salah, it's going to be easy. It's going to be easy. Shaitan's going to get you thinking about your status, how many likes on the Instagram, and all this other stuff, who's following me, how much fame I'm getting, whatever. You're easy, you're useless. You're useless for Palestine. Very, very easy. So the first thing, if you want to do any good, you have to be strong with your salah and strong with your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you contribute, you try to command to the known good. Then you try to prevent evil. That's also contribution. That's what we're doing with Palestine. Right? Is genocide a known evil? Yes, genocide is a known evil. So that comes under this. And then, what does Allah say? And be patient with what is going to afflict you. وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا أَصَابَكَ. If you go this route, you have your salah down, and you start to try to help people and contribute positively to society, and you try to call out what's wrong and change it, people are going to come after you. People are going to come after you. That's just the nature of the game. But you have to be ready for it, and you have to be patient. You don't face a little bit of opposition. It's like, oh, no, all right, I'm going to go back to the masjid and my 5 pillars, this and that, and my 4 walls, this and that. No, this is part of it. You have to stay patient. And you have to believe it's a test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of the day is going to bring you through. إِنَّ ذَلِكَ مِنَ عَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ. And that is really an amazing accomplishment. Next, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through Luqman, giving advice to his son, he talks about humility. And it's really significant to me that he talks about humility on the heels of what he just said. Because when it comes to the people who, let's say, their nasiha is a little bit overactive, right? That one of the temptations is to get your ego involved and to make it more about you and looking like you know and looking like, etc. than it is about actually having goodwill and sincerity to the other person. And the same with activism. The activism is the same. It can be very tempting to get into just being expressive and we're just here and we're protesting, but we don't really know what we're doing. We don't have really objectives or any goals. We're not doing any sort of critical assessment. Do our tactics really match up to what we're trying to accomplish or anything like that? All we know is here we are, we're protesting. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to know that if you go down this path of da'wah, okay, you've taken care of your salah and your relationship with Allah, you're contributing positively to society, you're calling out the wrongs and trying to fix them, and you're patient internally with what is going to afflict you, your enemies, etc., you also have to stay humble. Stay humble. Until he gives some examples. Don't turn your cheek away, and we would say in English, like, turn up your nose. Right? Don't turn up your nose at somebody. You think that now you're too big. MashaAllah. You start getting the speaking engagements, and you're too big to sit with the little guys, and you're too little to eat dal and roti. Right? Oh, MashaAllah, big shot. Yeah, no, that's not how it's supposed to go. You're supposed to win. Umar ibn al-Khattab conquered Philistine the first time. He was switching off with his slave who was taking turns riding their mount. And when it was time to enter the city, guess what? It was Umar's slave who was on top of that mount. And the slave felt embarrassed, like, hey, look, you're about to come, you should get... And he's like, nope, it's your turn. This is what's fair. And Umar walked in mashiyan, on his feet, to the point where they couldn't tell. Who was supposed to be the person ruling over us? Who's supposed to be the king? This guy? This guy's the king? The Prophet ﷺ would sleep on a mat made of reeds so that it would implant, those imprints. Like when you fall asleep on the pillow and you got those lines on your face. Right? The Prophet ﷺ would have those lines on his side. Alayhi salatu wasalam. And Umar would see it and he would start to cry. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I've seen the kings of Persia and the kings of Rome and they've got cushions, they've got palaces. Aren't you more deserving than that? But the Prophet ﷺ knew better. He said, that's for them in this dunya, that's for us in the afterlife. That's not our way, and they're not our teachers. Okay? We don't start getting a little bit of fame, and now all of a sudden, you can't tell us anything, and we don't want to associate. We forget where we came from. No, you have to stay humble, and that you're going to be corrupted if you don't. And that's a very, very important point. Don't walk upon the earth swaggering with arrogance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love people who are mukhtalin fakhur, which is a beautiful tarkib. It's a beautiful pairing of two words, because mukhtal from khiyal is like delusion, right? And fakhur is proud. So it's not just pride, it's delusional pride, right? It's like a cat looking in the mirror and thinking it's a lion. You think you're some big thing. You're nothing. You're nothing. And Allah says other place in the Quran, you came from a drop of sperm. That's where you started out. You think you're some big shot? And now you're arguing about Allah. Now you're doing this, and you only refuse to fly unless it's first class, and this sort of thing, right? Come on, fear Allah. You started as nothing, you are nothing, you're going to return to nothing. Everyone's going to forget you when you're down in your grave. You're nothing. So the proper relationship Allah wants us to have, then He says, waqsid fi mashik. Okay? And it's very interesting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again gives us a pathway towards balance and wasatiyah that is between two extremes. So we already addressed the extreme of sort of overweening arrogance, right? But there's also another extreme. There's an extreme of, let's say, feigned humility, right? Or humbler than thou, right? And this is something actually, Abdullah ibn Umar once was praying, I believe in front of his father, Umar ibn Khattab, radiallahu anhuma, and he was kind of, folding himself in and kind of making himself meek, and Umar radiallahu anhu chastised him for this. He said, don't show off like that. So no, you keep just like everybody else. If you're internally moved, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that you don't need to show it to anybody else, right? It's a very, very tricky thing. It's a very, very tricky thing. But we don't go out of our way to try to seem more humble than everybody. We don't accept the gift. We can't, be with anybody. We're so pious that I can't breathe the same air as you, astaghfirullah, this guy's got, logos on his shirt or something like that, astaghfirullah, fade haircut, astaghfirullah, right? This is a bit excessive. We have to be, as the Prophet ﷺ said, the person who mixes with the people and is patient with their harms is better than the person who retires and goes up on a mountain and recluses himself away from everybody. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to be iqsid, to be moderate in your walk, and to lower your voice. Because raising your voice is a blameworthy trait. And the worst of voices, he compares it to the braying of donkeys. That when it comes to, I've seen this a lot recently with the millions of WhatsApp groups that I'm in, when it comes to political organizing. It's really been an education for me since October 7th and everything that's happened, subhanAllah. And I'm sure it's the same here in the UK. I know in the United States there's a lot of scrambling around. It's an election year. People trying to figure out a way forward, and things get really heated. Sometimes. I don't know about you guys. I assume so because the Brits tend to be a bit more confrontational than Americans. At least that's my personal experience. One time when I was in Medina, I went out to lunch with one of the British brothers, and he saw another British brother in the restaurant. He started shouting at him in the restaurant. Hey, you! I was like, hey, we're in a public place. Okay, calm down. Right? But the point is that we should be careful. Let me put it in a positive way. You will do much more if your words are weightier than if they're louder. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes you can say things with dignity and gravity, and by keeping your composure has much greater effect on people when everybody else is losing their cool and acting like a fool. Right? So this is the spirit behind what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the last sort of advice that Luqman has for his son. When it comes to having humility, what do you have to raise your voice about? What really are you going to accomplish by raising your voice in that sort of way? You think you're going to get your way being a tough guy and shouting, right? And this sort of thing. That's not the way. You can have the person who shouts in that sort of manner, they've demonstrated that they're already weak. Because if they had real power and authority, they wouldn't have to shout in the first place. Right? That your influence over other people is a function of your piety, your relationship, the tawfiq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you, your record, right? How much people trust you, all these things that come from the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not how much you shout and yell and carry on and try to guilt people and blame people and things like that. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness for all of our shortcomings. When we measure ourselves up against the standard of what Luqman gives for his son, yeah, I know I myself, I can speak for myself, I feel myself falling short. I'm like, oh man, I don't do that. Like, oh crap, I remember when I used to do that. That's not good, right? We feel ourselves falling short, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the end is Ghafur Rahim. He is Ash-Shakur, right? Which is interesting because we talked about Surah Luqman, and the advice of Luqman is all about being grateful, and no one is more grateful than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, that's one of his names. And what it means when Allah is Ash-Shakur is that He appreciates even our meager efforts. Even our failings and flailings are still appreciated and recognized and rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for our shortcomings and to reward us according to the best that we did and to overlook the worst that we did. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Subhanaka wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Barakallahu feekum.
Barakallahu feekum, Ustaz Imam Tom. Inshallah, now we will begin the Q&A session. Yes. So this is the QR code for the Q&A via Slido, inshallah. And this is also the group chat link for our education chat, so you can know the further updates of education classes, inshallah. We will give 3 to 4 minutes for the questions to start coming in, and then inshallah Imam Tom will start answering questions, inshallah.
I'll ask a question in the meantime as a filler. I just utilize this time, inshallah. And that is, when it comes to us seeking knowledge, you come from a similar background in terms of studying at university, in secular universities and stuff like that. How do you advise us Muslim students to seek knowledge as we're seeking Islamic knowledge while we're also pursuing the other type of knowledge?
There's actually a surprisingly big answer to that question, and that takes into account the reality that the Muslim Ummah is a post-colonial Ummah, that we live in the wake of European colonization, and that has messed with us quite a bit, right? First of all, it has separated and severed into two different ways of studying, learning, and knowing. The quote-unquote secular subjects, whatever you're here for at Bristol, whatever you study here, and then whatever you do on the side. So that already is a front in the battle, trying to unite those two things, right? An Islamic epistemology, or an Islamic theory of knowledge would not look at anything that you do as outside of your worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is extremely important. If you become if your knowledge includes contributing, let's just give a very real example, to the genocide in Israel, then that's haram knowledge, right? And that's also haram livelihood. So everything that you do has an ethical component to it, and everything that you do has to be reconciled with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. You go and work for El-Bit, or whatever these sort of companies are that contribute to the slaughter of our brothers and sisters in Palestine, that's betrayal. That's betrayal. So your first task is to unite the two. You have to unite your Islamic knowledge and your quote-unquote secular knowledge. You have to bring them back into unicity, where everything that you learn and you choose to learn is serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what He wants done on earth. And there's a million ways to do that. You can do that through medicine, you can do that through architecture, you can do that through plumbing, you can do that through waste management, you can do that, there's a million ways to do it. I don't know how prevalent this is in the UK, maybe it's not, but I joke all the time in the US that the Muslims have their own Holy Trinity. And our Holy Trinity is doctor, lawyer, engineer. And I really give it to the parents, because I blame the parents, that their inferiority complex, their disgusting inferiority complex, makes them think that the only acceptable occupations for Muslim youth are to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. And that's why one of the contributing factors as to why we're powerless in the face of genocide right now. Because we can't even build a shoe. We can't mend a shoe, let alone have independence, let alone run hospital systems, let alone run school systems, let alone write curriculum, let alone manufacture. We don't do these things. We think that we're a doctor in someone else's hospital, in a Zionist's hospital, Can I say that? Am I going to be okay? I'm good? Okay. So the rules are different. I went to Canada and they said, oh, we can't talk about LGBTQ too much. And then here I know there's a lot of, you don't have as... I should not get myself in trouble. Anyway, where was I? You get the point. You get the point that this is something that you have to take seriously. You have to bring these two knowledges together. And you can do that as a plumber. You can do it as an electrician. You can do it as someone who dedicates themselves to raising human beings, the next generation. Right? You can do it in a million ways. And so to paint yourself into a corner and think that you have to be this, that, or the third is overly restrictive. That's another way where I think that we usually are taught to consider these things as individual choices and individualistic choices, right? What's my major? What's my career? What am I going to do? But what does your ummah need from me? What does Allah want from me? Those are different ways to think about it, right? Is there something that we're not doing that we don't have covered as an ummah? That's something that's thinking collectively. That's very different from how society encourages you to think. So that's a whole aspect of it. And then there's the sort of thing that everybody sort of is aware of about how to, study knowledge traditionally and this, that, and the third. Those things, I think you'll get good advice from your scholars and ulama that are here. I'm trying to add the things that I don't think that you've heard before, or maybe you haven't heard them as much. And so it's very doable. You just have to wrap everything into what you're doing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and put one foot in front of the other and do everything that you can.
So the second question is, when it comes to holding oneself to account, when it comes to the intention, how can one check themselves in terms of their intention? How can one make sure that their intention is purely for the sake of Allah, ikhlas?
I'll give the activist example. You have to be ready to step aside when someone better comes along. If you're not ready to step aside when someone better comes along, your ego's involved. You're not doing it as for Allah, right? In other realms outside of it, just see if you were to do it and get no recognition. Okay, if you would do it and get no recognition, alhamdulillah, that's a good sign. Now, level 2, what if you did it and the recognition not only didn't go to you, but it went to someone else wrongly? Would you still do it? ذَلِكَ مِنْ عَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ. Right? That's difficult. So those are the sorts of things, right? Who you really are is who you are when no one's watching. When the lights are out, it's not on the gram, it's not out there for other people to see and like and comment about and talk about. That's who you really are. So there's lots of ways, and I think those are a few quick ones. A good continuous practice is to train leaders to succeed. That's something that we don't do enough of. Train people that are going to be better than you. The next generation, the next person down, train them and want them to be better than you. That'll help fix your ego a lot.
So quite a few people were curious on the topic of if you could expand on the enjoining of ma'ruf versus enjoining of khair.
Well, there's levels to it, right? So the people who say that enjoining the good is only for the scholars, that's stupid. No, it's not. Like, look at the Quran. Like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves it general for everybody to do. However, it's in proportion to your knowledge. So if you have a certain amount of knowledge, then that's your sort of domain. So if this is going to be a mass activity or an activity of mass participation, then logically it would seem to be that this would be something that is easy access. Okay, the stuff that is known. Now there's a dimension to that, as we said, that is cultural, and that's why ma'ruf is tied to both. Right? I'm trying to think of one that I don't do, right? Like mowing the grass. I really don't care about if the grass becomes hay, like that's fine and well for me in the United States. But culturally, it's not seen as a good thing. It looks like you're letting the place go. It's an eyesore. Like, all right. So if somebody is taking care of that, that's a very, very humble, quaint example of something that is a known good that everybody should do. Or, if there's, I don't know, if somebody is you see something happening to your neighbor, that this is something where you step in. They're taking an Amazon package off of your off of your front doorstep or something like that. You see it and you just walk away and say, oh, not my problem. No, this is something that comes under the ma'ruf. This is something that you have an obligation now to step in and rectify and to help your neighbor out, right? So there's things like that. And then what gets tricky is that once we move into the things that are more readily viewed as deen, right? Okay, this person's got their pants below their ankles. Is that ma'ruf to tell him that he shouldn't be doing that? Should I be telling this that in the first place? These sorts of things, the differences of the fuqaha when we get into fiqh, honestly, you really should just leave it to the scholars and the students of knowledge. Because as Shaykh Abdullah Shankiti used to tell us, is that if you memorize one thing, there's a whole bunch of things that you haven't memorized, right? And so your knowledge is extremely, extremely partial. And so the problem is, they call that Mount Stupid, right? It's like, it's like at the chart of your knowledge versus your confidence, right? It's like you start to learn, it's like your confidence goes up. It's like, yo, I'm Shaykh al-Islam. And then the more that you learn, it's like, whoa, wait a second, I really don't know anything, right? So you probably shouldn't be getting into, and this is sort of one of my pet peeves, is how al-amr bil ma'ruf, enjoining the good, has become in some circles synonymous with calling people out on details of fiqh. And I don't think that's the intent of what al-amr bil ma'ruf is. Being good to your parents, visiting your parents, calling your parents, mending relationships with your brothers and sisters, right? Going to the masjid, helping people that are poor. There's so much ma'ruf. There's so much known good that's around you to do that doesn't involve you getting in some fiqh argument with somebody that you really aren't qualified to do in the first place, right? So that's sort of, I think, how I try to maneuver people to think about. For the average person, that your ma'ruf are things that everybody knows, things that everybody could use a reminder, right? Or that everybody could use help in doing. Everybody falls off, right? You're making salah twice in the masjid a day, and then you go for a few weeks and you don't go to the masjid. You notice it. Okay, are you going to go full auntie mode and be like, hey, I didn't see you in the masjid? No, like, hey, I'm going to the masjid, you want to come with? Right? That's al-amr bil ma'ruf. This is a very beautiful way of doing it. One time I was with Shaykh Abdullah Shankiti in Medina, and he was approached by, I think it was a guy from Algeria, and he says, my neighbor doesn't pray, like, at all, doesn't pray. Shaykh Abdullah said, don't tell him to pray. Everyone was shocked. They're like, what? The Shaykh just told him to not tell him to pray. He said, no, don't tell him to pray. He said, visit him, have tea with him, you get to know his kids, he gets to know your kids, you have a relationship. One day, after you have a good relationship, you come a little bit before the adhan. Now the adhan goes off, you say, hey, why don't we go to the masjid? Right? That's a different style of doing things. It has more ihsan, it has more nasiha, it has more sincerity behind it, because we would all like to be treated that way, right? We would all like to be treated that way. And so we should be treating other people that way. So it's a big topic, but I hope you get the general gist of things.
So I guess on the topic of the ayats from Surah Luqman, a few people were wondering, when it comes to the obedience of the parents, does that include where there may be something that isn't necessarily, what was the wording? So it's something that is permissible, but not haram, but is helpful to oneself, for example, a career choice or something like that.
I was in Shaykh Abdullah's presence when someone asked him this question. He said that, and it applies for wives too, so he answered it in terms of parents and wives, so just so everybody knows. If you can obey Allah by doing something that's pleasing to your parents or your spouse, then you should do it, in general. Unless you have a real compelling reason to not do it. It's like easy points, right? Now, you might think, okay, that's not fair, this is my life, my choice, my this, my that. Okay, mashallah, I say you've been infected a little bit there, right? This is a little bit of individualism creeping in. And this is something that I suffer from as well. So the disease is giving you advice for the disease. And there's levels to listen, all this stuff is case by case, okay? But in general, if you have the opportunity to please them with something, then it's good to try to do that. Now, is it strictly required of you? Is it like wajib, and if you don't, then it's haram? No, maybe not. But there's levels to it, right? So if you want to be doing the bare minimum, then okay. All of us do the bare minimum or something. Okay, that's just the nature of practicing, isn't it? You got so many babs. You got the bab of prayer, you got the bab of fasting, you got the bab of charity, you got the bab of obeying your parents, and this and that and the other. There's some bab that you're doing the bare minimum and I'm doing the bare minimum. That's just facts, okay? So you have to decide when this bab, how serious you're going to take it. Are you going to be doing the bare minimum? Is this something that's easy to you? Allah has created or made it easy for you to do more than that, right? So you're trying to get to Jannah, you're angling, and you're like, you know what, this bab is easy for me. I'm going to try to run through this door, right? This is how you kind of strategize things. But really, honestly, it's a case-by-case sort of thing, so I should probably not say more than that.
So the question was a bit specific, but I'm going to ask it in a little bit more general way. You mentioned how it's important to resist political ideologies. How should one go about so, and doing so with respect, I guess, in terms of action points, in terms of that, if that makes sense?
Two things come to mind right away. One is that we don't have enough Muslims in the humanities. Raise your hand if you're in the humanities. Woo! Yeah. A whole 3 of you. MashaAllah. So that's a problem, okay? How long can that go on? Not good, right? Or as the one, there's a poster I saw. Where's my passport? As a poster I saw, right? It was like, science can teach you how to like bring dinosaurs back to life. And humanities can teach you why that might not be a good idea. Right? Is that we need more participation in humanities. We don't have sufficient participation in humanities. And then we wonder, how come we're so susceptible to ideological corruption and occupation and colonization? Well, yeah, because no one's studying the history of ideas. No one's studying intellectual history. Nobody sees how all these things are actually, you can read about them and study about them. Right? Like where these ideas come from, right? What is the bias of philosophical naturalism that animates every history book you've ever read at uni and before, right? This is all stuff you can read about. But if you're angling just to be a doctor, you're probably not going to read about it, right? So that's one response, is that we need to be better balanced as a ummah, as a community, with what we go into. And then the second, I sort of intimated from the first half, is that really it all comes down to the history of ideas. If you understand the history of ideas, then you understand these ideologies and what they were responding to, how their responses to the problems that they attempted to solve sometimes fell short, sometimes made the problems worse, right? There's a talk that I gave once, it's on YouTube, I think, on the Utica Message channel, called something about philosophical liberalism, where I presented philosophical liberalism as a response to 3 main problems that it tried to solve, which was the sort of divine right of kings, absolute monarchy, and the inherited privilege of European aristocracy, and then the sort of totalitarian control of the Catholic Church, right? And if you understand liberalism as a response, trying to solve those problems, then you can actually have a critical assessment and say, wow, it really made those problems kind of worse, or it, fell short, or it didn't achieve what it set out to achieve. It thought that it could relocate, for example, that it could achieve more justice by relocating political sovereignty away from the king or the monarch and locating it in this sort of fictitious nation. Well, that didn't work out very well, right? And so on and so forth. So if you understand the history of ideas, then you can see from 30,000 feet up how all these things are moving and actually even where they're heading. And that's very empowering. So I would suggest that.
How would you advise that someone as a revert, alhamdulillah, I think in Bristol the revert community is growing year on year, in terms of how would you advise a revert to forbid evil, but also balance the aspect of gratitude towards parents in that scenario?
Now that's a good question. It's a good question because it forces us to consider the concept of sequence, tadarruj, that there is not enough sequential thinking in the Muslim community, and that applies to politics and what's going on both here and in the United States, and it also applies to this sort of thing. I had someone, I'll give you a quick story. You know, I had the benefit of converts, when I converted, other converts that were older than me telling me the most embarrassing, humiliating stories that they went through to stop me from doing something stupid. So one of them told me that they basically yelled at their mom for not dressing appropriately and covering up. And their mom was a Christian. So you tell me, is that putting the cart before the horse? Yes, absolutely. Like, Akhi, she's still worshiping Jesus, right? It's like you pick your battles first and you move in sequence. Like, you can convince someone that the Quran has a scientific miracle, right? But if they're still worshiping the cross, what's that you did? Right? Like, what have you done really? So you start with the most important thing, and then you go down in importance from there, right? So that's, I think, most important for converts to keep in mind, is that the ultimate thing is that you want your family and your parents to accept Islam, of course, and that's your main priority and goal, and that you really shouldn't necessarily move on from that goal. You'd rather than be, listen, to be real, you'd rather than say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah and drink alcohol and eat pork and go to the club. They have a sitting. They have a door open to them in Jannah. Allah is Ghafur Rahim. You would rather than do that than have them quit drinking, cover up, etc., but they don't say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. If that's your choices, you always go with the first. There's a crazy story from that I took so long to try to verify. Sheikh Abdullah mentioned it once in Medina, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And then somebody pointed me to be able to verify it. That when Umar ibn al-Khattab was the Khalifa, that, you know, there were these sort of like Christian warlords, or like, you know, I don't know, warlord is the correct term, governors or whatever you want to call them, up in Upper Sham. And the Muslim forces were expanding. And one of them was like considering should he accept Islam or not. And so the interface that he had with the Muslim soldiers, he said, well, I'll become a Muslim if I can be the Khalifa after Umar. And the two guys were like, what? It's like, hold on, well, we can't just give it to you. We have to write back and send something back to Umar, like see what he says. So they write a letter back to Umar. Obviously, this is before email and telecom, so I mean, it has to travel and then come back. The guy dies before the message comes back. Okay? When the message comes back from Umar had written, tell him yes. Tell him yes. He can have it. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can guide him to Islam, then Allah can continue to guide him after that. You know, so when it comes, that's like there's levels, and the absolute biggest thing is getting that shahada, and everything else comes second. So don't sweat the small stuff if you haven't taken care of the big stuff. Allah knows best.
So a lot of the scholars, they recommend to learn manners before learning the rest of religion. What can you share in terms of the importance of that? And also, what is one specific factor that you gained, whether it be in Medina or whether it be in another place, when it comes to that, when it comes to the importance of manners, with ulama specifically?
Showing off is so sneaky. That's the thing, right? Ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi, in his book Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin, says that people can show off on anything they can find to show off about, whether it's how much you pray or you're fasting or whatever. And it's so subtle, right? Even like a little thing, like, you know, your bro catches you and you're just like, oh yeah, sorry bro, I was just praying. I think you didn't have to tell me you were praying. You could have just kept it a secret between you and Allah. And I was like, you know, like it's so subtle. Which is why the question earlier about, you know, sort of like how to tame the ego and doing things, not just in secret when no one knows, but even when the thanks goes to someone else, even if someone is angry at you for doing the right thing. Sheikh Abdullah used to tell us that you should be prepared to do a good deed to somebody and have them spit in your face. And this is backed by the story of Abu Bakr and Mistah, right? That's mentioned in the Quran. You know, Abu Bakr, he had a relative that was very poor. His name was Mistah. and he basically kept him economically solvent. He paid for his needs. And then the ifk happened. The ifk of Aisha, the slander against Aisha happened, and Mistah got caught up in it. Mistah spread the rumors, he spread the ifk. And when Abu Bakr heard about it, he's like, that's it, I'm cutting him off. Very human reaction, right? But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrected him, and the Prophet ﷺ corrected him, because what would it have shown about all that he had spent if it was really just conditional? He was what? He wanted some sort of good treatment for it? That's a transaction. That's not charity. That's not worship. That means that really this whole time you were paying him so that he would treat you well and talk good about you. And you weren't ready for when he started slandering you or your daughter. Okay? So if you want it really to be for Allah, get ready for that person to just spit in your face after you give it to him. You know? So those sorts of things, like those really, really, really subtle things, people can show off in anything. They can show off in anything. I've seen people show off with the types of questions that they ask the ulama, right? They don't have really a question, they just want to ask something just to ask something. You know those guys, right? And then other people that word a question in a way that they're kind of like showing that they know something, right? There's so many subtle ways to show off. So just trying to be humble. And Sheikh Abdullah used to tell us, you know, it's harder in this era, but one thing that will help you with this is spending time with the poor. And I mean like the poor. I mean like the guys that we pass by on the drive here that are like, you know, walking in the street that look like they're probably on drugs. Yeah. Go up and give them a blanket. Just one day in the month, right? Go up and give him a pair of shoes or something like that. Bring him a meal or something like that. Ask him how he's doing. Obviously, this is different. Sisters, you have to take certain precautions that the men don't necessarily have to take. Be smart, don't put yourself in a dangerous situation. But seriously, it's like these are people that Allah put as a test for you. Our modern society has insulated us from them. When I used to live in Medina, the first place I lived in after I moved out of the dorms was like the hood. It was like the hood of Medina. And there was a guy he was crazy. He was crazy. Like, we would pray in the masjid, and he would come in, and we're all like, you know, facing the Qibla. He comes in, and he starts screaming bloody murder. Like, you thought like you were going to get stabbed. Like, it was like a really scary thing. But the people of the neighborhood understood he was a little mentally disturbed. He had some sort of like stuff happen or whatever. And so they tried their best to make sure that he was good. You need water, you need something to sit down, relax, you know. Like that was a fitna, that was a test about how we were going to react, right? And in those societies, it's easier because people like that are more incorporated in society. Here, they get shut off and sort of segregated into this neighborhood or this corner or this block. You know, you can drive by, you don't have to look away, right? There's all these ways that modern society insulates us from these types of people, right? That's why, you know, there's first class on the airplane. You pay the money so you don't have to sit with the poor folks. Right? I mean, people who are flying aren't poor, but you get the idea that there's this ethic that we have in neoliberal society where you basically pay to not have to deal with or think about poor people. Okay? So go out of your way, if possible, to break that in you. Don't think that you're any better. Don't think that you're good, that you're too good. Don't think that this person is, don't be like Qarun and say, well, I'm in my situation here at Bristol because of my knowledge and my this and my that, and this person, they're where they are because, you know, they were stupid or they were lazy or maybe they made some bad choices, but maybe they're going to get into Jannah. Who knows? The Prophet ﷺ said that the poor person will enter Jannah 500 years before the rich person. 500 years. Because if you think about it, the poor person doesn't have to be asked about anything. Every blessing that you have, angels are going to stop you at the gate. It's going to be like trying to get into the U.S. Border Patrol. You're like, hey, what's that? What'd you do with that? What'd you do with that? Did you use that in an appropriate way? Did you use that in a good way? Right? But for the poor person, it's going to be like getting into the UK with an American passport. Just flash that thing and I'm in. Right? So, I mean, I'm just being facetious, but you get the point, is that they have less to be asked about. And so that person you might be looking up at them on the day of judgment. You don't know. You might be looking up at them in Jannah, they might be at a higher station than you. So humble yourself.